o'clock. Clerk, could you conduct a roll call?
Yes. Supervisor Mulherin?
Here.
And Chair Williams?
Here.
Thank you. Good
Mo,
morning.
would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, on to item 3B, public expression. Do we have any telecomment?
No, we do not.
Okay, no public expression. Item 2A, sponsored by the Executive Office, discussion and possible action, including direction regarding the development of Mendocino County's 2022 legislative platform. Executive Office, would you like to present?
Good morning, this is Nadia Tipton, Executive Office. Attached to this item, you'll see that we have this current year's adopted legislative platform for your review. Typically, we attach this item as we go forward in development of the next year's platform. So we use this as a base to start with looking at priorities for the next calendar year. So you can go through and determine the items that you'd like to see brought forward for Mendocino County. I do want to point out that on page 11, SB 10 did fail in November. So that should have been stricken from the 2021 legislative platform under public safety. I don't have anything else at this point, but if this committee would like to give us priorities for 2022, staff can come back with a red line of those items for your review and consideration.
Mo, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we actually received several items of correspondence, particularly relating to the cannabis industry. So if we could go to page, well, it's 15 of the PDF or page 12 of the document and take a look at that, I would appreciate it. One of the things that the board, I believe, had approved under state action was support of SB 59, which is actually to extend provisional licenses through 2028. So I think that we should align with that date as opposed to the 2024. And
there's also attachment number 3 that came in this morning from the cannabis program manager with a number of red line recommendations. I wonder if we should bring, is Kristen available to call on?
We can go ahead and send her the invite and see if she can join the meeting.
Yeah, okay. I think it may be beneficial if we can have her coalesce all of the cannabis related, both from the supervisors, from industry associations, and bring us back a consolidated set of red line changes related to cannabis.
I have a question for Nadia while we're waiting for that, if you don't mind. Just because I've never done this process before, do the various departments submit sort of their recommendations? So I'm thinking about planning and building, and we know that the changes that happen on a statewide level can sometimes impact our ability to build housing and how it really affects things on the ground in Mendocino County. So how, besides all of the work that you do, how else do you receive recommendations?
Typically, the departments do have a chance to submit their recommendations to either the General Government Committee or the board and work with myself. In the past, it was Sarah Duquette. So in the past, DOT, for example, Howard DeShiel, Transportation Director, has come in and spoke with this committee regarding issues and legislation surrounding the Department of Transportation. I believe Planning and Building in the past has as well. So they are welcome to submit those recommendations and what they would like to see come forward in the platform. and work with you at your direction or with me. You're muted, Mo.
Thank you. One thing that I've also wondered about is this is like a placeholder item on our standard agenda, and it's usually not attached. So can we make sure that it's also, once we have the 2022 approved, that it is attached to every agenda item when it's on the regular Board of Supervisors agenda?
You'd like development attached?
No, just the legislative platform, just the document is sometimes not attached. And I just think it would be helpful if it was attached every time, even if we didn't make any changes, because it's typically on our agenda, I think, as a placeholder.
Yeah, it's on the agenda as a placeholder in case, there's any letters that have gone out or any current actions or things that we want to bring forward to the board and make aware. The legislative platform is posted to our county website under the executive office, under our legislative program link. So it is listed there. But if this committee would like to direct, we can attach it to the standing board item as well.
Could we simply include the link in the placeholder?
Yeah, that would be acceptable.
This is Deputy Clerk Lindsay Doherty, and I've recorded including the link to the legislative platform on the standing legislative update item on regular Board of Supervisors agendas regularly as a directive.
Thank you. And I think we have our cannabis program manager on Zoom now.
Yes, hello, Kristen Nevedal here, Cannabis Program Manager. I have joined and happy to participate in the discussion.
So I this morning I reviewed your recommendations, and we recognize that there may be some additional cannabis-related requests from industry, from cultivators. Would you be willing to take all of that input and bring us back an updated legislative platform as it includes cannabis?
Yes, I would be happy to do so.
And do you want to talk about some of the highlights of your recommendations and how those align with local needs?
Sure. So would the chair prefer that I just walk through what I sent in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. So the first item is a repeat of what was supported in 2021. So I had amended the first bullet point to read, advocate for a state extension of cannabis provisional licenses through, at a minimum, January 1st of 2028, allowing cannabis applicants to complete the local permitting and state licensing requirements, including the completion of project-specific CEQA analysis that is required for annual licensure. Originally, the board had recommended provisional licenses through 2024, but then during the 2021 legislative session, sent a letter supporting SB 59, which had pushed that date out to 2028. I recommend adding the language at a minimum because currently the May revise of the governor's budget trailer bill does have an unlimited timeline on the ability for the Department of Cannabis Control to renew provisional licenses. That timeline is probably likely fairly negotiable at this point, but 2028 does align with what the board had supported in SB 59 earlier this year. I would recommend striking the recommendation to advocate for the California Department of Food and Agriculture to accept the local programmatic environmental document as sufficient for local site-specific CEQA analysis for the issuance of state cultivation licenses. And the reason for that recommendation for striking that item is that the cultivation licenses will be regulated by the Department of Cannabis Control looking forward as early as July of this year. So there will no longer be a California Department of Food and Agricultural role in the review of cultivation licenses at the state level. I would recommend replacing bullet point 2 with language that reads, advocate for the newly formed Department of Cannabis Control to remove the project-specific CEQA analysis required of all annual licenses, and instead provide guidance to local jurisdictions to ensure that commercial cannabis operators meet CEQA compliance during the local permitting process. This recommendation is consistent with a recommendation that came forward from the California Cannabis Advisory Committee, which was appointed under Governor Brown, or former Governor Brown. And in addition, the recommendation to provide guidance, to have the department provide guidance about meeting CEQA compliance, is consistent with what was passed by the voters under Proposition 64. Also, in the May revise, there's currently language that would remove the state's authority as lead agency, which would leave the project-specific CEQA analysis requirements, which are baked into regulations, likely open for amendment by the Department of Cannabis Control as they move forward with emergency regulations, and then early in 2021 permanent regulations for the consolidation of licensing authorities. I have additionally recommended that the county advocate for state legislation that incentivizes local jurisdictions to permit medical and adult use retail sales to ensure that patients and adult consumers have adequate access to legal cannabis. We have seen the state legislature over the last few years propose a number of different bills that would incentivize local jurisdictions where we have bans in place. So to incentivize local jurisdictions that have banned retail sales to actually regulate retail sales of cannabis. By incentivizing retail sales of legal cannabis products, that action would act to undermine the illicit marketplace, as well as ensure that there's a robust sales or legal retail sales framework for Mendocinos cultivators and manufacturers to move their products into the legal supply chain. Expanded the recommendation, or recommend expanding the recommendation to support direct-to-consumer sales by supporting opportunities for direct-to-consumer sales with an emphasis on events including farmers markets. I believe this recommendation would be consistent with a number of not only public comment, but also board conversations that have happened since my arrival in my position in March. With support to direct-to-consumer sales, but also farmers markets, which both have significant challenges currently. And then finally, my last recommendation as of this morning would be to advocate for state legislature to remove the cultivation tax to provide a stabilized economic opportunity for small farmers and to prepare Mendocino's farming community to engage in federal legalization without being shut out due to excessive taxation. I believe this recommendation is consistent with both the desire to ensure that there is a robust opportunity for small businesses and small farmers to engage in the legal marketplace, but also the federal platform that the board approved in 2021 recommends a regulated framework for federal legalization. The frameworks we have seen thus far proposed do include an export tax. There's significant concern that California's system of taxation at the state level, which includes a flat-based or a weight-based cultivation tax, on top of a percentage-based excise tax, would likely be such, would likely, when coupled with an export tax, mean that small businesses would not be able to financially engage in federal legalization in the export of cannabis, which is likely intrinsically important to the future of Mendocino's cultivators. So, I'll leave it there, and thank you so much for the opportunity to walk through those. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for presenting. Do we have any questions before we move on to public expression? Hearing none, clerk, do we have any public comment on the line?
Yes, we do. The first and only caller on the line is Michael Katz.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Good morning, honorable committee members. Michael Katz, Executive Director of the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. I'm speaking today on the item for the legislative platform. As you may recall, on January 5th, 2021, item 5H regarding the 2021 legislative platform for the county, the board ordered, quote, Supervisors McGordy and Williams to work with staff on a legislative platform to incorporate Mendocino Cannabis Alliance recommendations and Covelo Cannabis Advocacy Group recommendations, also to incorporate advocacy of streamlining efforts for better vegetation management in our federal forests with the platform to return at a later date to the board. I attached to my correspondence all of the items that I am referring to. The agenda item for today included a document titled 2021 Legislative Platform, which on page 9 reads, on January 5th, 2021, the board adopted the 2021 legislative platform reflecting the county's legislative priorities and policies for the upcoming legislative cycle. Given the direction for the board that I had just read and the lack of inclusion of the recommendations from MCA and CCAG in this agendized document, it appears that this statement is inaccurate. Following the board's direction from January 5th, we request that you please incorporate the additions to the 2021 legislative platform that were proposed and adopted by the board as soon as possible and return to the board for approval. Given the timing of this item, we feel we must now act quickly to ensure that the opportunity to engage meaningfully at the state level on these items does not pass us by completely for this current legislative session. Along these lines, we request a meeting with the county lobbyist at their earliest availability to discuss the approved additions to the platform. We further request that the board continue to engage MCA, CCAG, and Origins Council in the development of the 2022 legislative platform as early as possible in the process to maximize opportunities for input. We sincerely appreciate the committee addressing this item at this time. Thank you very much.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Hey, before we lose you, are you comfortable with us directing this task to Kristen, given that she has the background and the central point, maybe better than shared ownership?
Well, we would be happy to work with Kristen on this item. I think that the key component here is that these items that were approved by the board in principle, which have theoretically not been incorporated into the legislative platform for this year, which are still active and important to address, we would just like to see that incorporated as soon as possible so we don't lose this legislative session. Whatever the way is.
Understood. That makes sense. Kristen, could you take that on?
Yes, I would be happy to take that on.
Okay, and then the other request I heard was for...
Supervisor Williams, this is Deputy Clerk Lindsay Doherty. I need a restatement of the directive, please.
The directive is for our cannabis program manager to work with local cannabis associations to incorporate their feedback into the legislative platform.
Would this feedback be, Nadia Tipton, Executive Office, would this feedback be for inclusion in the 2022 legislative platform? At this point, the 2021 legislative platform was adopted by the Board of Supervisors, I believe in April of this year. I've never seen an amended legislative platform, so I would leave that up to the direction of this committee.
Supervisor, do you have any input? You know, my stance would be to leave it to our cannabis program manager to determine whether it's appropriate to amend or include in the 2022.
Yeah, I think since things are changing on a state level so quickly, especially around the May revise, we can just, if a cannabis program manager could take a look and see which item belongs in which year, I think that would be helpful.
And then the other request I heard was for MCA to work with the county lobbyist. Nadia, is that a typical arrangement?
I'm not aware of anything like that happening in the past. I can look into it and speak with our lobbyist. You know, they contract with us, the county, So I don't know if that would be appropriate direction for an agency outside of the county to work with our contracted lobbyists.
Yeah, so I would feel comfortable with our cannabis program manager taking the input, bringing it back to the board for approval, working with the lobbyists, and then reporting back to close the loop. And I think that's the underlying concern, is we want to make sure that our county lobbyist is apprised and understands the requests.
I can send these recommendations over to our county lobbyist and tie Kristen Nevedal in with him as well in his office. If this board would like, I can ask that he also speak to this committee at the next meeting, if that is your direction.
That works for me.
It works for me as well.
Okay, direction given.
Thank you for joining in on such short notice, Kristen. Is it back to the committee, Chair?
It's back to the committee. Are there any other items besides cannabis?
Yeah, there's one thing that is not important, so I'll speak to Nadia about that offline. But the COVID-19 response and recovery, is it our plan for 2022 to, I see that some of these things could be incorporated either into Health and Human Services or Natural Resources, especially regarding Potter Valley Project or concerns about the drought, maybe could be added into disaster. Is it the plan to go ahead and keep it a separate item for now, or are we going to incorporate it into other items?
I would leave that up to the discretion of this committee. Whatever you would like me to do, I can draft a red line and bring it back to you at a future date.
Supervisor Williams, do you have a preference?
No. I like the red line coming back to a future date.
Yeah, for me, because the items overlap with some of the other legislative platforms, I really would like to see it incorporated in, as I mentioned, economic and community development. Certainly, it could still call out that it was related to the COVID pandemic, but I think that if we can keep everything in its general columns instead of that specific event, I think that might be helpful to streamline things.
I can do that, and I'll bring that red line back.
I don't have any more questions on this item, Chair.
Okay, my last comment is there's a couple bullet points related to broadband. And we know the state is ramping up to significantly fund broadband development. I think we should solicit the input of the North Bay North Coast Broadband Consortium, understanding that the terms of any broadband funds that may come are critical to Mendocino County. Not just that the money is available, but that that criteria matches our needs and capabilities. Could we give direction to staff to work with the perhaps Jeff Terrell and Tom West, North Bay North Coast Broadband Consortium, which we're a member?
And that'd be fine with me.
Okay, direction given.
Supervisor Williams, can I have you restate that as one clear directive, please?
Direct staff to work with Tom West and Jeff Terrell and the North Bay North Coast Broadband Consortium on aligning broadband related bullet points with changing state broadband funding landscape.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think any last comments on this agenda item?
I don't have any.
Okay. So next item is 2B, discussion and possible action regarding request for direction to staff on the consideration of the review and update of all county social media use policies and county social media handbooks. Sponsors are County Council, Human Resources, and Information Services. Who would like to present?
If I may start, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So back on February 9th, the Board of Supervisors referred to general government a review and update of the county's social media policy. Currently, we have attached a copy of the county's social media policy, the specific policy for the sheriff's office, and I believe the social media handbook as well. Staff would like to get some direction as to which areas in particular that the committee would like to focus on in terms of update. But I would also ask, there are a few areas that I would just like to highlight for the committee in terms of areas of some potential legal concerns and legal issues, and areas that I think that may be worthy of an update. And the first of those is in the existing policy, there's discussion essentially about moderation of any sort of forum. So, this is going to vary a bit from the type of platform that's being used, but in many cases, there's an ability for posting or for comments. For example, on a Facebook site, often there will be comments on any post that's put out by a particular department or a particular government agency. And there's a discussion in there in the policy about essentially attempting to make the forum for discussion a limited public forum. As a government agency, when we establish these sorts of forums, there are certain First Amendment limitations that govern sort of how we can moderate and what we can do in a way that simply doesn't apply to a private entity, a private corporation, or an individual. And we've identified some areas in the policy that I think are or the policy identifies some areas that I think are appropriate for being the subject of a policy, but I'm not certain that the entire list was reviewed by council before it was included in the policy. I'd like frankly, I'd like direction from my office to go ahead and do a review of those, identify which of those may have infirmities, particularly in light of developing case law, and then to go ahead and maybe revisit that list. But there's a few other issues related to that as well. One of which is that there's really sort of a question of the consistent application and sort of how that's being addressed both from department and case to case. As sort of a practical matter, it's one thing to have a policy that says thou shalt not post these things on the forum. It's another thing to actually devote staff time and resources to reviewing and removing anything that's problematic. And generally where this has come up and where we've gotten questions have had to do either where there's a complaint, for example, if there are comments on a forum that seem to be improper or harassing or defamatory towards a third party, we sometimes have some member of the public say, why are you allowing them to say these things about me, or why are you allowing these comments on the site? And the other is where there are things that may be distracting from the county's core mission or otherwise problematic. So, for example, thankfully, I don't think we've had much of this, but one of the categories that we identify in there is political activity, right? So there's restrictions on the use of county resources for political or campaign activity as imposed by state law. So when you start to have comments for or against particular candidates on the forum, it raises questions of essentially, are we misusing county resources, but also are we potentially discriminating against incumbents if we allow those statements to be made by members of the public, but not those people who are actually in the position who to be operating the forum. So one of the things that I think would be worth looking at would be having the individual departments sort of make a determination in each case whether they're going to allow comments on a particular forum or a particular website. We've actually had departments that may not think that or may not have put in the thought as to whether or not they even want the comments. It's just sort of activated there by default. We've definitely had some departments where we've had conversations with them, and there have been reasons why that community feedback is important and helpful to them. But then I think we need to have some sort of clear expectation as to sort of how those things are administered, and also an expectation that a practice that's not going to lead to a claim that essentially the policy is forced in a discriminatory manner, right? We don't want a situation where someone who is against an incumbent elected official is the only one whose comments are being removed or censored as a result of the policy, even if the policy on its face is defensible. So, I would ask if the committee would consider sort of going into a little bit more detailed review on that and the First Amendment issues that are going to be coming up in that context. And then the other thing is that it wasn't really clear to me at the time whether the board's direction was wanting us to revisit the social media policy in terms of the official social media put out by the county, or if it wanted to be addressing sort of social media use by county employees, potentially outside of the work context. Now, I will say that is an issue that I've actually, at some employment law conferences, heard recommendations that we do undertake a policy to that effect. There is an ability, similar to how we as a government entity are limited in how we can control public comments in the forums. There's also First Amendment issues that come up in terms of any limitation of off-duty speech by a county employee or a county contractor. And on the other hand, there are definitely areas in which that can be legitimate and that can be appropriate. So, to give you an example of a relatively recent Ninth Circuit case, there was a situation in which I believe it was a peace officer out of Nevada made a comment online. There had been a news article about a suspect that had been arrested after he had killed another law enforcement officer and had been fleeing from law enforcement. And the comment that was posted online was something to the effect of, well, it's a shame that he was arrested and didn't come back full of holes, something along those lines. And in that case, the agency felt that it was appropriate, even though it was off-duty conduct. The speech was sufficiently related to the nature of the employment, and frankly, had the significant potential to undermine confidence in the law enforcement agency. That it went ahead and proceeded with discipline and termination. Now, I won't get in too much into the specifics of that case. That one, for the actual reason it was up on appeal, had to do with the determination of whether the case could be decided by a judge or whether it had to go to a jury trial. The Ninth Circuit in that case ultimately decided there was a question of fact that had to go to a jury and remanded it back for a trial. But it gives, I think, a pretty good example of the sorts of statements that might be of concern, and that it may be useful to have sort of clear expectations with in terms of off-duty speech that might undermine the faith in the public agency and the agency's ability to do its job. Currently, we do have the policy in, I believe the Sheriff's Office has a Lexipol policy that addresses, off-duty speech and use of social media. There's some things in there that are pretty specific to law enforcement, but it may be worthwhile to have something sort of county-wide that, would address those concerns. But it's also something that needs to be carefully crafted in a way that will be compliant with the First Amendment, addressing the First Amendment issues. And I would actually note it may be prudent. It also may be a meet and confer issue. it may be prudent to bring in LCW on that one. I haven't talked to Director Schertz about this, but it may fall within the scope of their existing contract. And since they advise other public agencies on these same sorts of things, they may be able to provide some draft policies for this committee's consideration. And again, that may be a meet and confer issue as well. But that's another area that, frankly, it would help to have a bit of clarity and clear expectations rather than sort of responding as situations pop up. With that, I just asked the committee, if those are areas that the committee would like us to be taking a look at, and if there are other areas in particular the committee has concern. And I don't know if Mr. Schertz or Mr. Rakes have anything that they'd like to speak to as well.
Human Resources, any comment?
William Schertz, HR Director. No, I think County Counsel Curtis really covered everything that we're concerned about from an HR perspective.
Thank you. And Information Services, do you have any additions?
I agree with William. County Information Services, sorry.
Okay. Committee comment?
So I would like to check the boxes for all of the above. I think that, not only do we have concerns about employees, future employees or contractors and their use of social media, I think County Counsel referred to it as off time and what we can or cannot either review or review pre-employment or review during their course of employment, recognizing that you have freedom of speech, you don't have freedom of consequences, and your actions on social media, just as in, public, do reflect on your employer. And in that case, this is the County of Mendocino. So for me, the social media policy that we currently have appears to be very outdated, 5 years old. So there are social media professionals in our community that do this type of work, revising policies to current standards. So it would be great if we could have not only LCW look at it from a legal perspective, but have a social media professional review the policies and the handbook for to bring it up to more current standards.
Well said. Do we have any estimate as to cost? The agenda item has a blank funding source and fiscal year cost.
Yeah, if I may speak to that, I don't know that we had looked at anything with respect to a social media consultant. There is an existing contract with respect to LCW and their services on the labor negotiation. We may need to speak to them, get a little bit of an estimate as to whether that's something that would be consistent with the what's already covered on the existing contract. And my apologies for not having that in hand.
Okay. Do we have any public comment?
No, we do not.
All right. Can I invite a motion or direction?
I had one more question, Chair, if you don't mind. We received, or the social media use policy for the county does say that department heads can have also individual policies for their department, and we only received one policy for the sheriff's office. So are there other departments that have separate policies as well? Because I think those should be reviewed at the same time. Thinking of perhaps the DA's office, or I'm not sure who else might use social media. We've added some new social media accounts, I think, in the very recent times, like the cannabis program, I believe, has a social media account. So are there other departments that have their own policies?
If I might, through the chair, Janelle Rao, Deputy CEO. I don't know that they have what you would call a policy, but what we can do is solicit the input from each department and ask that they present their protocols or procedures for the next committee meeting for you to, if this were to continue on, which I imagine something will be coming back to this committee, Or if you see this moving forward to the board, we could present that to the board as well. But we would definitely obtain the input from each department and ask that they define those protocols for you.
And if I may just add, Mr. Chair, the Sheriff's Office is the only one that I'm aware of that had adopted a formal policy and consulted my department for input.
For the most part, what we ask departments to do is have procedures or protocols and leave the policy to the board. So they may call it something else, but we will definitely get their input for you.
So I'm willing to make a motion, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering,
Perhaps county council could help with the language.
well, I'm wondering who the lead as far as staff is. That the three that are presenting today, or it says County Council, Human Resources, and IS. So do we want to keep that as like a team approach?
I believe that would be helpful.
And is there a timeline on coming back?
I think I'd like to have an update at the next General Government Committee.
Okay.
County Council, do you want to just stop me if I get it wrong? Or did you want to?
So I guess I think what I've heard so far in terms of direction is to go ahead and be looking at both the existing policy with a particular focus on the First Amendment issues related to moderation, to reach out to the individual department heads to get any policies or practices that they have adopted individually, and to work with LCW or labor negotiators on a possible policy addressing personal employee speech and off-duty social media use. I guess what I would also ask is, this is something that really had been initiated by the board, and I would ask if there are areas of particular concern that the committee would like us to focus on as well. I sort of zero in on the legal issues, but if there's anything as a policy or as a practical matter that you'd like us to look at, we could certainly take a look at that as well.
I don't have any further. I think this plan covers all of my concerns.
I just want to add that I would like a social media professional in addition to legal counsel to review the policies that'll be coming back.
Would you want the committee to be involved in selection?
I'm not sure of the typical procedure. I don't mind being involved with the executive office on that.
If I might.
Staff, what do you recommend to bring in a social media expert of our choosing?
If I might, Janelle Rao, through the chair, we can come up with a list of vendors, or if perhaps Supervisor Mulherin has some suggestions of local individuals. Our competitive bidding threshold is $25,000, so we wouldn't necessarily need to conduct a competitive bid, but we could most certainly come up with something that you felt was a scope of work, and I could work with each of you individually, and I'll just go ahead and put myself out there. I'll take the lead in working with County Council and HR on getting an individual on contract. And then we can invite that person back, hopefully at our next meeting of this committee, so that you can engage with them if you would like. But we could definitely start with what we have as far as the handbook and coming up to speed. Like Supervisor Mulherin mentioned, it appears to be over 5 years old, so most definitely a facelift and bringing it up to current practice, if that's acceptable of this committee. I would have no preference in how we would you know, when it's less than 25,000, we typically go off of reference in who exactly we do business with, but I'll look, if you want to be involved, you can most definitely participate.
Thank you. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that works for me. I would strike local always if we can use local. That's top priority, but I'm more concerned about finding somebody in short time and somebody who is actually an expert. So was that sufficient direction?
I believe that's sufficient.
Okay. If no further, let's move on to agenda item 3A, approval of minutes of February 8th, 2021 General Government Committee meeting.
I'd move approval of the minutes.
Is there any public expression?
There's no public comment on this item.
Okay. Roll call.
Supervisor Mulherin
Yes.
and Chair Williams.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay. We have no announcements today and no other matters from staff. Recommend adjournment.
Mr. Chair, sorry, one quick thing. And this committee meets fairly infrequently, but we had asked that the department heads come back and we have some conversations about contracts and also agenda items. So I'm just hoping that we can, if we don't have any special Monday meetings, we can continue our next scheduled general government committee meeting and have that item come back for discussion.
And I agree. Clerk, can you apprise us as to the next available meeting slot for general government?
This is Deputy Clerk Lindsay Doherty. The next agendized, adopted, scheduled meeting of the General Government Committee is Monday, August 9th.
Supervisor, does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I recommend if there's no further, we adjourn.
Agree. Thank you.
Meeting adjourned at 9:49.